Okay, this is actually the last section of this unit, and this is indirect proof. This is something different. So what we've been doing since the beginning with proofs is a direct proof. We work with given information, we work with our toolbox, and we justify things with theorems, postulates, all that good stuff. But indirect proof is a little bit different. It's we're going to kind of work backwards, and this is valid as well. And here's an example. Let me kind of walk you through this example. What we do is, and you see the process down here. First of all, by the way, when you see this slash through, that means not. So AC is not congruent to DF. Angle B is not congruent to angle E. So it says list the possibilities of the conclusion. So clearly, either angle B is congruent to angle E or it's not. You see, that's the only other choice, right? They're either congruent or they're not congruent. So what we do in these indirect proof procedures is we assume the opposite of the conclusion. So here in this problem, we're going to assume that angle B is congruent to angle E. So if we remember, we were given A congruent to D, we mark that. Let's mark the AB congruent to DE. I never mark this stuff. Now, if we assume that B is congruent to E, then we have congruent triangles based on ASA, right? So if the triangles are congruent based on ASA, that means that AC would be congruent to DF by CPCTC, but we were told that those are not congruent. So that means our initial assumption had to be false, because you see, we showed this contradiction. So remember, we assume that these were congruent, but if they are congruent, we come up with an impossibility. So that means our assumption that they are congruent was wrong, so these angles must not be congruent. Does that make sense? Don't worry, I'll walk you through one here. All right. It's actually not too bad. We're going to do this in a 2-column proof, and then we just give a little explanation at the bottom. Okay? Now, what we do first, you can state the given information first, but usually what I usually do that in step 2 now, actually, in this type of problem. So this indirect proof method, by the way, you only use if you have these negation things going on. So we always assume the opposite of the conclusion. So let's assume BC is congruent to DC. How do I know that? I assumed it. Because we know either they're congruent or they're not. There's nothing else you could do. Now, let me get down my given. I do need that. And then angle BAC is not congruent to angle DAC. That's, of course, given. Now, remember, I have to mark this assumption, too. BC is congruent to DC. Of course, I have this reflexive piece in between. So clearly, we're going to have SSS here, right? Triangle ABC congruent to triangle ADC. And then we say the angle, what? BAC is congruent to angle DAC. See, what we're trying to do is contradict something in the given. And you see, it was given that those were not congruent. We're saying that they are congruent. So we've shown an impossibility. Okay. But, so now we do a little explanation. But it was given that angle BAC is not congruent to angle DAC. Therefore, by the way, these 3 dots mean therefore. Therefore, our initial assumption was false. So So BC must not be congruent to DC. So you have to give a little explanation. Okay, once you show, here's the contradiction in step 5. Explain that, it was given that blah, 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 blah. So we've contradicted a given. Our initial assumption was false, and then state the final conclusion that you had to do to begin with. Okay? This next one's not the easiest thing. It's a little bit long, and sorry that there's not much room here. I'm going to go to do C. I think that's a better one to do second. So look, prove. So our first step is going to be, well, let me have my first step is my given information. So I'm going to start step 2. I'm going to say AB is congruent to BC. And of course, that reason is why we assume. Now remember, BD bisects angle ABC. That gives us this. I don't mark this. We do our assumption AB congruent to BC. Let's catch up to the tick marks. Angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD, and that's by def of bis, or bisection. Okay, and now we have what? We have congruent triangles after I do my reflexive step. This will come back in a moment. It's really having difficulty today. I don't know what's going on. Let me give it a second. Here we go. So now we have triangle ABD congruent to triangle CBD, right? And that's by SAS. Now, what are we going to take from that? This is kind of a cool problem. So we're going to take the angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. That's, of course, by CPCTC. But now in step 7, we can say that these angles are supplementary. Okay. And then, so what's this? If sum of two angles straight angle, then sup. And then we can say that angle ADB is a right angle. This is that new thing we did just a couple days ago, right? If angles sup and congruent, then right. So we've shown that angle ADB is a right angle, but you see up here it says that ADB is acute. Either it's acute or it's not. We just showed that it's a right angle. So we have a contradiction now, right? But this contradicts the given that angle ADB is acute. Therefore, our initial assumption was false, and AB must not be congruent to DC. Okay? I'm going to let you mess with these other two yourself, and then you can check your handiwork with my solution document. The bottom one down here is 6 steps plus the explanation. So this is 6 steps plus the explanation. And I apologize for this one that we skipped. This one, it's not super hard. It's just long. I have 10 steps plus the explanation, so you don't have much room there. But you can check your handiwork with the solutions that I post. Okay?